Welcome to a podcast on marketing. I'm your host, Jordan Ogren, and this is a podcast where we talk about marketing. First question: who are you and what do you do?
Hey Jordan, thanks for having me. My name is Hiba Amin. I am a marketer based in Canada. At the heart of everything I do, I think it always pretty easily falls back to content, which is kind of my strong suit, where my passion lies. But I would say in the past 2, 3 years, I've really been branching out into more of the marketing leadership and strategy aspect of the job. But throughout my whole career, I've worked in tech across some more enterprise companies, most recently at a PLG SaaS company, and now moving into kind of like a customer-led marketplace for tech. So
Wow.
yeah, kind of all over the place, I guess, but very much in tech. I think that's my sweet spot, and content within that as well.
Yeah, has content always been something you've enjoyed, or as you've just gotten these roles, they've all been pushing in the content way and you're good at it? Or like for me, for example, like I wrote a book when I was in like fifth grade, very small book, but like content's always been like a passion or like a kind of a thing I've done. Is that true for you, or is it more like you just fell into it?
Yeah, I think I've just always gravitated towards it. I had a few co-ops, which was a part of my university program, just trying to figure out what kind of jobs I liked as they related, I guess, to an extent to what I was studying. And my final co-op was an 8 month placement at a tech company that was near Toronto. And it was fairly open-ended, where it was kind of just like a big learning opportunity. And that's where I kind of just started writing blogs, dabbling in social media, like understanding the impact of things from an organic, very high level, from an organic perspective too. Not fully diving into keywords or anything too crazy, I think, at that point. But I was like, oh, I really like this. How do I get into another tech company after I graduate? But I guess more in a space that I was more interested in, or at a company I was more excited about. And so, yeah, I started off my journey. My first job out of grad was a marketing coordinator, which I feel like is fairly common as a first job into marketing. It's kind of like you're a generalist, you're just learning. You're there to dabble in a whole slew of things. And so I tried my hand at ABM. I tried my hand at like demand generation and events, and content was something that I was just like, I really love this. This is like the coolest thing I get to, for me, like it's the piece of marketing that, at least how I learn, allowed me to understand our industry, our customers the best, because you're constantly researching, you're constantly like producing things for your audience. And for me, that was the most interesting thing. Not to mention, just content honestly touches everything. Like it's not just blogging, it's not just landing pages. It is, for me, content is marketing. Everything
Hmm.
falls under content. Ads for me falls under content. Like everything, well, not necessarily falls under, but everything touches content in some form. Um, and yeah, I think that was just the most exciting thing. And it's kind of evolved into how do we grow um, a business. I think in the last 2 years, I've been a lot more revenue focused than I ever have been as a marketer. And that was a really, really cool shift in how I think um, as a marketer as well, because um, yeah, going into my last company, which was called Soapbox at the time, we rebranded. I joined as a content marketing manager, and so a lot of my work was definitely the website, was the blog, was social, was distribution of the content we were producing, and like webinars, email, like all of that kind of stuff that you'd kind of expect. Um, but then, yeah, COVID hit and we went through layoffs, and I found myself as a marketing team of one, and I was reporting to the CEO all of a sudden. So now my metrics weren't really like, hey, we're growing in our keywords, or like our important keywords, we're growing in traffic, we're growing in signups that the blog drove or these specific content pieces drove. Now it's like, hey, our marketing efforts drove X amount of revenue this month. This is how much we've grown. Our customer acquisition cost has gone down, and it's like cheaper from this channel. And so I think that was the coolest switch, because now I saw marketing as a very massive impact on the business as a whole, as opposed to just one channel or function. Um, and so, yeah, I think that was, I don't think had I not reported directly into the CEO, I don't think I would have had that switch as easily.
Yeah.
Um, but that was a moment I finally understood. I was like, oh, this is what my boss was talking about this whole time. I I get it. Like, how did I not get this before? This makes so much sense now. I see why these things are important.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. Wow, as you're talking, there's just so many streams of thoughts running in my head. Um,
Yeah.
because one of the things, like I had a conversation with someone just about like what they've changed their mind on, and it was kind of like that marketing, didn't have much impact or couldn't impact the company, and they've changed their mind. And it's kind of cool that like you were like a 4 or 5 year old kid just tossed in the deep end of like you're gonna learn to swim, and you're gonna figure out
Yeah.
like what works to fully keep your head above water, or you won't be here. No, just kidding. Hopefully, no parents take that as like an actual. But that's and then your point about content being it's like literally like the most basic atom in everything. Like in a business, like
Mhm.
content is even like you can break down like financials, like they're like content and how you display them and how you like do you have nice cool bar graphs. But like I've found as I went into content that like once you go into it, like it's there's no going back in the sense of like seeing it. It's like cocaine. Like you just never will stop once you kind of go fully into it. Not speaking from experience,
Yeah.
but that's an interesting thing that you say that like I didn't really put the piece of like email content. Like it's all even ads to your point. Like paid media is very much so content. Like it's a creative. There's some graphic. There's something, and then there's copy. There's
Mhm.
writing to it, a headline, a body, a call to action. So the more you can understand content, the better I have been able to do marketing. Obviously, I'm like a young grasshopper, so I'm still learning it all. But that's cool. What is something, and you might have touched on it, but like, what is something you're obsessed with lately in kind of the realm of marketing, content, business? Is there anything that like you're just geeking out about lately?
Oh man, I think a few things. I think the thing that I guess that's most related to marketing practitioners, let's say, is template libraries. I think like having seen firsthand the massive impact it's had on a business, and really putting content as the forefront of marketing, I would say, and marketing initiatives. It's been like the gift that keeps on giving. Like at Hyper Context, which is the company we rebranded from Soapbox, we built two separate template libraries. One, and to give some context, the product is basically an app that is built for managers. So everything from one-on-ones and meetings, to just coaching and developing your team and having those like tough conversations or good conversations kind of all just lives there to enable managers to have a little less chaos in their day. Otherwise, it would be very tough to say, I've promised like 6 people 6 things, and I don't remember what the hell we just talked about. There's a place for it now. And so something that we developed as a template library was we noticed that managers have so much like going on. They're like running in meetings all the time. It's so hard to like have focus time, and so your cognitive load is just at an all-time high. So how do we reduce that? How do we give them resources because they're searching for them? How can we give them resources that enable them to do their jobs better without having to like take on such a strong mental load as a result? And so that was the first idea that was super tied into the product, which was building an agenda templates library.
Mm.
So if you don't know how to run your first one-on-one, if you don't know how to run like a salary review meeting, what about you're putting someone on a performance improvement plan? Most people don't have management training. And so you can't just like, yes, you can Google it and it's helpful, but half of the content out there is just like, be nice. It's like, okay, well, what is the actionable content that I can do? I don't want the fluff. I want to actually know what should we be talking about? How do I structure this conversation?
Mm.
I don't want to spend like hours and hours listening to podcasts to figure out like the best practices because it's so different on a case by case scenario. And so the template library we built because not only was it a gold mine for ranking for a massive amount of long tail keywords, and so long tail keywords being, obviously you can go for a keyword like meeting notes. That's quite like a very short keyword, but a very high search volume. But what if you get a bit more specific,
Mm.
like meeting notes for X, Y, and Z? The search volume is going to be quite small, but the intent's going to be much higher. And that's what we've found. So someone searching for a one-on-one meeting versus a one-on-one meeting with an employee who's leaving, like those are things people will search. Just obviously the volume's not going to be like 30,000 a month. It might be 100, and that's okay, because we've seen that those people convert. So from a strategy standpoint, it made a ton of sense to go that route. From a product standpoint, it made a ton of sense to go that route. And so I think template libraries, I've been like screaming off the rooftops with every SaaS marketer I've spoken to, at least, because they're so helpful. They drive a ton of value to your existing customers. they give you a lot of opportunity to rank for a slew of long tail keywords. And I find that they're the easiest, at least for us, it was like a very easy time. It was an easy like process to get people into the product, but get to their time to value so much faster. Like they experience value from the product at a faster rate, meaning that the likelihood of them actually retaining and coming back the next day to the product is a lot higher as well, because they got value from it from day one, as opposed to like 2 weeks from now. Because I'm sure we've all signed up for like hundreds of products thinking like it was cool, and then we just forgot about them the next day.
Yeah.
So how do you find those sticky points?
Hmm.
And for us, that was a really big sticky point. And over time, now that obviously I was in the driver's seat at this point, I saw that those libraries drove the most paid customers. So I was like, okay, how do we replicate this? Do we build more agenda templates? And to an extent, I think there's like an area of diminishing returns. And so how do you keep the quality of the content super high while also like obviously expanding it? And that's what I always found really tough. So we ended up building another library, which is goal examples. So another thing that managers have to do, set goals for their team. There's so many like options, and it's so draining to try and think of new goals
Hmm.
every quarter, especially for like specific individuals. So what are the goals you give to a content manager versus a paid media manager versus like a demand gen manager, like all these different potential roles. And you being a manager doesn't necessarily mean you're an expert in every single one of these domains. And in most cases, you're not. You're probably going to have your sweet spot. So for me, that's content. But I don't know what the hell I'm doing on the paid side of things. So how do I manage someone if I don't know every like nitty gritty piece of their job? And I think that's where things can get a little tough. And that's where the value really came from too in that goals library, was it connected to the product. Again, it ranked for a ton of keywords. But it also kind of tackled that problem that we were trying to solve for our customers. And in the end, it ended up driving about 30% of our acquisition, which on average, we made one change before I left, and so that pushed us to being around 600, signing up around 600 companies a week to the product. And so that's a lot of acquisition. It's a
Yeah.
lot of people coming. Not to say everyone's retaining.
But still.
It just depends where they're coming from. But if they're coming through the agenda templates library, I know the likelihood of them converting to a paid customer is significantly
Hmm.
higher. Um,
Yeah.
and so, yeah,
Yeah. And I feel obvious.
I guess that's what I'm obsessing over.
Yeah, I would too if it drove that much like success, right? Like, if I'm not even going to use a horrible analogy, but something that was thinking as you're saying that is education per se. Like, obviously, a template is meant to just be somewhat a plug and play. Thinking of like Canva, like the
Mhm.
templates in Canva. Totally hate
Yeah.
it. Like, just because you see them everywhere in the sense of like they just rip and kind of scratch and rip. Where like I feel like maybe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like with your kind of approach, it was more or less you were educating them with the template of how to do a one-on-one, how to do this review meeting. So you're
Mhm.
kind of helping them get closer to finishing the job that they'd use your product to do, but they needed some education, something up front that like you can't really quantify of like, why should we invest in this? It like doesn't, it's not like it's free, it's not paid per se, nobody's buying the templates, but it's so much more, like you said, it's getting signups and it's getting high intent people, because like I'm a manager and I really need this template. So like as you're talking, something came in my mind is like, how did you know managers? You said, managers have so much cognitive load, which all resonates with me not being a manager, but like how did you get there? Like obviously did you talk to managers in your company? Like how did you get to like the fact of this aha of like we should create a template library because these managers are so overwhelmed and they need it?
Yeah, I mean, like working at Soapbox Hypercontext, that was the most exposure I would say I've had to customers in my entire career. It was just constantly talking to customers, like weekly, bi-weekly, whatever it was. In some cases, we'd have like 5 to 7 customer calls a week, if not more, which is quite a
Yeah.
lot, I would
Wow.
say. We also didn't have a sales team, so it never felt like customers were gated. I think having been at very sales-led organizations in the past, you feel a lot of pressure to say, I don't want to bother this sales rep's customer because they're already talking to them. So even if there's not a direct gatekeeper, you just feel a bit of that internally. And I think that kind of pushed me away from that
Mm.
mindset. Was when my CEO was just like, why do you need me to book a call with customers? Why do you need customer success to book a call? Just go talk to them. I was like, yeah, that's a fair point. They're humans. If they say no, that's okay. But if they say yes, that's awesome. And I think the other thing was we didn't just stick to existing customers. We spoke to people who used other platforms, who used like Google Docs, who used like competing or just pen and paper as another competitor, to be honest. And so just understanding what it was like for managers. And I think the other piece was I was just naturally always talking to managers because of all the content we were producing. I'm a very big advocate for, um, you know, getting a lot more credibility, I would say, from outside voices. And you can find a lot of that online, but I think having firsthand quotes is quite nice because yes, you get to improve your content, but you also get to build these relationships with a big number of people over time. And then you start seeing like this big army of people who support your brand, whether or not they use your product, doesn't matter, but they support your brand. They're there to advocate for the messages that you're putting out. Um, and so every time we put a new content piece out, we have a new like launch, we have a bigger base of people who just care about what we're doing and support. Because you're lifting their voice up, they want to do the same and reciprocate. And so, yeah. And I also just learn a lot more from talking to people versus like reading personally. Um, and so that was a little bit selfish on my end, was just constantly trying to talk to managers, talk to them. And finally, I think when I made my first hire, like everything made sense. And I started rereading past pieces and I was like, oh man, I was so close here. But this is like the one little missing piece of context. And like actually being in the position now of being able to write content selfishly for myself. It was just like really cool. It was a cool experience to go back to a lot of the content I had produced
Sure.
for the last 2 years and say like, oh, this is actually helpful. Like, this is sick. I'm going to copy this agenda template for myself, tweak it a little bit. I'm going to use this advice on how to give feedback. This is the frequency of doing X, Y, and Z. And so it was just like a very cool, like, I guess, full circle
Hmm.
moment when I made my first hire.
Yeah.
And then I could start producing more content based on my
Mm, mm.
experiences. Thankfully, it was a very positive experience for both of us. And so a lot of the content was more on the like positive aspirational side versus like, here's a nightmare. It's more like, here's how to
Right,
avoid a
yeah.
nightmare. Just be a good person. And so,
That's great. Wow,
yeah.
wow. As I said before, a lot of kind of thoughts running in my mind, because what you're talking about, I think, is like a lot of people putting out content on marketing is marketers marketing to marketers. So it's very simple for them to create a lot of
Mhm.
content to know their audience so well. But like I work for a company with engineers. Like there's a that sell to engineers. Like there's so many different use cases where maybe like I'm not a manager, but I need to write content about being a
Mhm.
manager or how to be better at a manager. And like I think the first thing you shouldn't do is try to like do that on your own. So like obviously I'm drawing out parts of your saying
Yeah.
like you talk to customers, you used either customers or people who look like our kind of ICP for our content. I think that's key. Is like
Mhm.
I don't know what it's called, like it's not user generated content, but it's like using conversations or asking people like here's what 7 leaders think is wrong with one-on-one meetings. And it's like it's simple content to
Mhm.
make. You have 7 conversations, or maybe you have but like I think that's so critical is, whether it's using SMEs or just using people creating your content. And I wrote in my daily email, always quick to plug myself, that like people should market with your customers or with rather than like at. Like there's a huge, for me, a contextual shift
Mhm.
when I'm marketing or talking at someone or talking with. And like we've all had the conversations, whether it was a first date or even just a friend that you're meeting, of like, wow, they didn't ask anything about me. Like that was completely them talking at me. Like that was not fun. I'm not getting coffee. Like
Yeah.
coffee was fine, but like the experience was terrible. And I think, we can really apply that to our marketing, of marketing with people. And to your point, what you do is like, if no one gives a shit about what you're talking about, what you're doing, which is many companies, like rather than just continually trying to force people to give a shit, like you should give a shit, you should give a shit. Like, how about you find people, create content with them, and eventually, like you said, you create a bigger base that push your content out. So trying to do a horrible job synthesizing like the 17, as they say on Clubhouse, thought bombs or like knowledge bombs, trying to condense those for myself so I really can grasp them, because there's a lot of good stuff you said in that. And I think your experience probably has driven so much. There's this saying in religion that like there's a tricycle where like the Bible or like scripture and like tradition are the back legs and experience is a first leg, because like everything goes through and is filtered through experience. And I find your all the things you're saying has come from experience, like driving so much traffic. Like I went on your LinkedIn and you just have bonkers numbers for like your information under it. Like you went from like, not saying you were doing nothing before, but like it was like, okay, she's doing this. And then like just crazy bonkers numbers. I said that 2 times, but like it all came from the experience. So I love you sharing, in depthly kind of the experience of that, of all that you learned through what you're geeking out on, which is template libraries, which came from, in a sense, your experience of seeing them work so well.
Yeah, and I mean, like, my LinkedIn's a little chaotic from a numbers perspective because I my one of my managers in the last like 4 years, he really pressed on me because at the time he initially helped me try and find a job, and then I ended up working for him, which worked out really well. But he was like, he initially our relationship started because he was looking at my resume, and he was like, "What are the numbers?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" Because I was a coordinator at the time, and I was like, "These are all the like things I did. I managed webinars. I did like all these things." And he was like, "What was the impact you had on the business?" And so since then, I mean, maybe it's like not the right thing, but I'm just like, I will always have numbers to back up what I'm saying. Similar to when you make statements in blogs, you're like, is there a stat that can back up what you're saying? That's like a credible stat, not just linked to a listicle of 30 stats. Like, where's the original study? Or is there like research that's been done? You can't just say like, to be a good manager, you have to be nice. It's like, okay, cool. Why? And so I've kind of taken that with my career as well. As like, I can say I grew the company. Well, what does that mean? By how much? In what scenario? How did you do it? And so I don't know. I think it's helped in some capacities. I've been like a very no BS marketer, to be honest. Like, I think I share a lot of our numbers mostly on Twitter, I would say, is where I have the most fun. But I build a lot in the open,
Yeah.
failure or success. Um, and a lot of that came because I was a team of one and I needed recognition. I needed more like marketers to like who appreciated what I was doing. I just was craving that kind of attention and support because it was a very engineering dominant team. And as supportive as the team was, they can only go so far because they're like, okay, you ranked on a keyword, like, cool. Whereas like marketers, if it's a very hard one, they like
Yeah.
appreciate that to a much larger degree, I would say. And so I've just built a habit now of building very much in the open, asking questions, talking to people, but just writing out like processes
Mm-hmm.
as well on Twitter, um, kind of to help other people out, but very selfishly as well to, get praise that I'm kind of craving. That makes that like is fully understood and appreciated. Yeah, and so I think that's kind of made building my resume
Mm-hmm.
easier over time because like I always have
Yeah.
these numbers at hand because I'm just always like curious to share. I'm like, hey, this worked. Why don't you try it? Maybe you'll get promoted. Like that
Mm-hmm.
would be sweet.
Yeah. No, I
And
love
so
that.
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Numbers
no,
on
I love
resumes
that.
are
I
cool.
appreciate, the first step is kind of admitting you have a problem with just needing recognition. So I appreciate that because I think, there's a deep need for everybody to want to be, patted on the back, some more than others, but I'm glad you actually can recognize it and you're aware of it. And I think building in public is a great way for that and B, just a great thing to do. I quote unquote build in public as well through my newsletter. And I think it's just so key because
Yeah.
you're kind of thinking things through differently than if you just do it at work because you're writing a post about it, you're analyzing whatever. Aside from kind of the psychological benefits that you were talking about, and I think that's so interesting and good. And there was just so many things you were saying because I think numbers, as you were saying, all about the numbers. Like if you go to any great direct response writer in the past, like it's always very specific. It's how you will lose 15 and a half
Mm-hmm.
pounds using this 36-day, 2 workouts a day, two like specificity, like come join our newsletter with thousands of marketers. It's like, well, are you really thousands or are you at like
Yeah.
998 and you just want to put 1,000 on there? Give me the real
Yeah.
number. Like I used to do that on my LinkedIn about like my 38 subscribers. And it's like most people were like, dude, why are you doing that? But it's like I just want to be open with people and I'd rather like be more specific. Into your resume, like that was one of the things that stood out to me. So obviously that was great advice from that person because those numbers, I wrote a piece about it of like with weightlifting, I can't walk around and say, hey, I can bench 380. Like I can do it. And people are like, yeah, he's a bench, he's a muscle guru, where like with marketing, you can say you can do anything. I can write really well. I can market really well. But like for me, it's like, let's put the weights on the
Yeah.
bench and let's see what you can actually do. So the numbers help me literally see, holy crap, like or drove the inbound engine to 400 600, like all these numbers really contextualize, like, okay, she doesn't just talk it, like she can literally walk it. And I think that's a big lesson that I've taken in from somebody way back when, but it wasn't as literal or direct as the advice you got, is I don't do it as well as you've kind of perfected, or I guess inherently I just can't lift as much, so like I don't have this cool of numbers. No, but no, seriously though. So I think
No.
that's like, because if you can lift a ton and you're just telling people I'm like buff, like it's way different than like I can deadlift like 500 pounds. Like that's like, okay, like you're really buff. Like you don't just look it, you
Well,
do it too. So I
yeah.
found that to be something that was popping off as you were sharing, just about specific, like really putting numbers. And then even as a marketer, like that's a clear way to make the shift from like cheerleading marketing to like driving results marketing, is like, what'd you do for the business? And if there's nothing, then
Mhm.
hey, I need to change something because I'm not driving any literal business change. So that's good. That's good. I have a question. As I was going through, as this podcast is totally off the rails and I love it. It's all about experience at this point. It's great. I have all these built questions. I've been wondering for the longest, like I should probably like can those, but they're good sometimes. But from your experience working as the communications coordinator for the Institute of Quantum Computing, what did you learn from that experience being the communications coordinator? So a long time ago in a generalist role, like did you learn anything
Yeah.
that you now apply, whether it's like literally or somewhat subconsciously?
Yeah, I mean, so that was one of my co-ops way, way back. I think I don't know if I learned anything that I apply to my day-to-day job. It was very internal communications, I would say, because I have no place in talking to the quantum community. Um, the thing I did learn about myself though over time is that when I join companies as a personality trait, I get so like involved and so excited about everything. So for that semester, I was like, quantum computing is the future. Like, I understand. I don't remember, to be honest, a lot of the words anymore, but I was like, this is like the cutting edge like research, and this is the person like doing it, and like
Yeah.
just getting so involved in the product that I was, or the product or community or space that I was in. And so I think as I've started to select companies that I want to work for, I think that's definitely a piece of the pie for me, in terms of like I do need to care about the mission and vision of the company and the product, but it's not number one on my list, because I know that regardless of what I do, my personality will just, I will get so excited about
Mm.
whatever I'm working on because the people around me are very excited about it. And so I guess from like a career point of view, what it taught me was I'm okay with putting certain things lower on my list. And in that being like sometimes the space and product. For me, like I've noticed that the things that really, really matter to me is the company culture, and not in the sense of like, hey, here's a beer pong table and all this crap. It's like, what flexibility do I have? How much autonomy do I have? Do people trust each other? Do people treat each other as adults? Are people transparent? Do I feel kind of like there's something sketchy going on? Do I feel like people are gonna treat me with respect, and obviously you earn it, but to an extent, like do they treat you well and treat you like a human? And do you like again tackle
I
problems as
love
an adult? Sorry, my dog's just
it. I
hearing
love
some
it.
sounds, I think. But I think that was like the most important factor for me, because those are typically the things that impact how motivated and happy I am at work. And a big part of that for me, which is definitely a big reason why I went to Soapbox, was my direct manager. Can I learn from this person? Are they going to be an advocate for me? Can I be an advocate for them? How do they treat the team? Does the team actually feel comfortable communicating with one another? Do people feel comfortable speaking up? Because a lot of these different like things that you see, at least in the interview process, can impact how you feel. And so I think that's ultimately what that job taught me, was I'm going to be excited about anything I work on. And when I had my like final day at Soapbox, I was like, well, see me in a month. I'm going to have some really strong opinions about something not related to leadership at all. And I'm just going to kind of change my
Sure.
personality a bit, at least online. Um, and so I'm sure in a month, I'm going to be so opinionated about the buying process in tech. Um, and because that's going to be
Sure.
part of the content strategy is like, those are the customers I'm going to talk to. Those are the people I'm going to talk to. But yeah, I think it just tells me that it's very
No,
easy. I don't know.
no, I
I'll
think you
stop
did a
there.
good
I'm
job
rambling,
like
but
taking out of that experience some actual, like for some career wise, but just in general of like what really matters in your job. And obviously you have the personality aspect that you kind of are just driven to kind of champion whatever company you work for. But I do think regardless that there is kind of that autonomy and some other things that are almost more important at times. But from your explanation or from you explaining that, like I had a
Mhm.
thought, like, is it important for marketing to become a champion of the product, to like you live it and breathe it, like, wear the t-shirt, like, do you find that is necessary, or do you think you can keep distance between like, yeah, quantum computing is kind of lame, but I'm going to create some great content, or do you find you need that kind of just like, putting the flag up for the cause?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna give you the worst answer, but I'll kind of add some context beyond. But I would say it depends. I think it depends on you as a person. It depends on what you're looking for in a job. I know some people work to live and others live to work. And I think trying to find a good balance is always important. I think that's something I personally struggle with quite a bit, and it's always something I'm actively working on is making sure that work doesn't consume my life, just because I do get really excited and I do champion the products that I work for. Um, but I think you have to be interested in some capacity. If you're just like think about writing, copywriting, and think about like content you're producing. If you have no interest in what you're doing in the product or the space, that's going to show. And you're also just not going to have a good time at work. You're spending at least or around 40 hours at your job every week. That's the majority of your time.
Yeah.
Or that's a big chunk of it at least. If you're bored all the time, like that sucks. And it, I guess like if you're okay with that, if you're okay with like being bored at work, then that's totally fine.
Depends.
That's like, and that's why I say it depends. Is like those are the things that I care about. I set a really high standard for myself. I want to actually enjoy what I'm doing. I want to enjoy the space. I want to be curious and have that kind of a curious mindset. And some people can find that in the industry and in the content and the research that they do, while others can like just look at it purely from a marketing lens and say, what are the experiments specifically I can run and find interest and excitement there? Less about the space, more about what they're learning as a marketer. Probably from that point of view. For me, I like having both. Is like I have a deeper understanding of our customers. I have a deeper understanding, and I'm actually interested in it. Um, and how do I pair that with like the
Hmm.
experimentation mindset and the growth mindset? Um, but yeah, for me, I think I personally, I think it really matters that you give a shit about the company you work for. Not to the point where you drop everything in your life to work for them. I think that's pretty unhealthy. And not to say that you can't have hobbies, you can't like have a life, like all of these things. I think there's a nice balance. But if you're spending around 40 hours a week on something, yeah, you should probably have like at least a very small inkling of an interest in the product. I don't think I think I always used to think the people was enough for me. But people are constantly leaving or turning over. And so I don't think the people is enough. And I was really close to taking a job last year purely for a manager because I completely idolized her. I love her to death because she's just such a good human, but she's incredibly smart. But I had no care for the product, like could care less about the space, could care less about the product. And even though I know with my personality I would at some to some extent, it just wasn't enough for me. And so I had to take a step back and think like if that person wasn't there, would I take the job? And I was like, absolutely not. There's cooler products out there. Now that I've been in tech for long enough, I see the kinds of industries that are available and that are around, and I see the kind of problems that I would be more interested in solving. Um, and so while it's still not the top of my list, it is there. It is on the list. It's in the top five. I would say.
No, your
So
long-winded
that's a
answers
very
make my
long-winded
job
answer.
extremely easy to ask questions. No, I like that, and I think just from what you're saying, obviously every marketing question can be answered with "it depends," but I think like what I took from what you're saying is just the fact that like it helps. Like, yeah, you can still get somewhat fit by slamming Oreos and like these every day. Like you can, but why not just become more a little bit more vegetarian or whatever. Like it's just a little bit easier to do your job, aka get whatever you're trying to achieve health wise. So yeah, I totally align with that. Like obviously I have not had an extensive career. I've worked for the same company for 4 years, but I found that like as like I've done my 2 to 3 kind of freelance jobs, like as it's in something I care about, like personal development or whatever, it's just easier to work on it or come up with ideas, or as you're saying, like problem solve around that. And I think there's
Mm,
people that like you can just become excited about anything. I think there's strategies you can use to become excited about anything, aka your spouse or whatever, of like, yes, I love, NASCAR or whatever when they love it. Like, but I just think it's easier
mhm,
and you have less like work to do your job if it's somewhat you enjoy it with great people. So that's like the, great product, great space, and with great people, and then kind of for you, it was thinking through which of those really matters in the sense of like, I may not care about my product at all, but I need to be with great people. So I need my whole department to be like enjoyable, whatever. I think that's a great lesson for people like looking for jobs, but even just like kind of analyzing your current job as we're in this like great, reshift of the workforce, great resignation, they called it, that like you can kind of choose what you want to do. So why not choose something that you
yeah.
enjoy or people you enjoy? No, that's good. That has me thinking.
And I mean, if you work in content too, like I think a question you should ask yourself, because I think this is a very easy path that you'd end up going down, is this an area that you'd like to be a subject matter expert in? Um, because you're obviously
Yeah.
spending days on end researching, talking to people, consuming content about it, producing content, like all of this stuff beyond just like selling, you're ultimately teaching yourself to become a subject
Mhm.
matter expert over the next year or two or more. And so like leadership for me, that was a really big piece. I wanted to be a people manager, is something, is a goal of mine. And that was a really neat way to combine learning and marketing with one of my own personal goals. And now I have a lot of strong opinions about leadership as a result. It's something I care
Yeah.
about, something I wanted to continue to learn. And I think it resonated in the content we were producing, and it drove value beyond just like basic marketing principles. I would say it like you could see the color, you could see, I would say, the care
Mm.
and the dedication to that space. At least that's feedback
Yeah.
I've received, which has been nice to hear. And so, yeah,
That's
I
a
think you have to give a shit.
yeah.
It just depends
How
the
much? Yeah,
variation,
depending on your
yeah,
personality and
how
different things.
much
But I really
you
like
need
that
to.
about what you just said about the subject matter expert. Like I'm thinking right now, I'm already looking on Google, like what are some quantum, mechanics, some physics. Because I just want to be the next Einstein. I want to be the next X. So I need to get in this space because I totally get like what you're saying. Like that's why I like the best marketers sometimes, not all the time, but like sometimes are the people who sell a marketing product because they're just talking with marketers, CMOs all the time. It's like, dang it, like I'm really good at like
Mhm.
engineering or whatever because I like talk with them, but you're over there like improving your skill as you're doing your work. So I think that's a critical question to kind of ask of like, would I enjoy to be, and not that if I don't, like I'm going to quit tomorrow, but as you said, in the content context, that's really important and has my brain kind of going around. So my final question before I jump into the 3 final questions is, what was it like to do the full rebrand from Soapbox to Hypercontext? Like, and then a successful domain change, which was interesting, that recouped domain authority within 2 weeks. I love it. Getting very specific, the timing, 2 weeks. Like, what was that like? What'd you learn from it? Is there anything that you can like look back on that now you take with you?
Oh man, it was exhausting. I was actually just talking to another brand right before this about our process, just because they're like, "We're going through a rebrand. What do we do?" And I'm like, "Don't do it."
That's it.
But yeah, I think so. There's a couple of reasons why we both wanted to do the rebrand, but also had to. So just for some added context, our prior name was Soapbox. Our domain was soapboxhq.com. We were a really well-known brand, I would say, in our space. We've been around for a while, and people just, I don't know, it was just a well-known brand, I guess, just looking at how many people actually searched for our brand. But it also got muddled because Wistia launched a product, which is a video recording tool called Soapbox, or a video tool called Soapbox. And so I think that was a really hard thing to compete against because Wistia is a big company. They've got a ton of authority, ton of content. And so we were actually seeing a lot of signups that would message in and say like, hey, how do I record a video? We're like, how did you get this far?
Hmm.
Thinking we were that product, like the onboarding and website is very, very not video heavy. Um, but cool. But it's just people are like, this is the product I want. I'm just going to go do it. And some people actually upgrade it. And you're like, what's going on?
Oh
Um,
wow.
it was just so I think that was a piece where a lot of our branded terms we were competing against like Goliath, which was really tough for us, given the resources we had at the time. It was just me, and then a new content marketer. A little bit, I think, a month into starting the rebrand work. And then the other piece was we had just gotten into Y Combinator, but we had gotten in as a new brand. And so that added a really tight deadline for us. So I think it took us a matter of 2 or 3 months from picking a name to
Wow.
actually going through the launch, which is super tight, not having a lot of resources. And I think I would say we went about it in a much lighter way than the average brand would. Like we set a list of priorities that we were like, this needs to happen day of the rebrand. All of this other stuff that typically might be done within the first week or two of a rebrand, we're okay like 6 months later, having this done within the next 6 months. Things like updating graphics from really old posts, or like updating review websites, like all of these like little things. It honestly, the list piles up so fast. Beyond just design, and like backlinks. What about all the lists you're on? Like, how do we reach out to everyone? Like, what's the priority there? Um, and so, yeah, I think the rebrand took us about 2 or 3 months. We hired an agency who did a lot of the technical piece of it, which I think was the most important. Was for us, like as a business, considering I come from a content background, about 80-90% of our traffic came through organic channels. 80-90% of our acquisition as a result also came through organic. So if we're changing our name, what are the implications? What is our comfort level? Because like, yes, our domain did recoup within 2 weeks back to the same, I think it was 72 at the time, I can't remember. But it doesn't mean that all of your rankings are recouping that fast. It's going to take a while. So what's kind of like our threshold of comfort of losing business for a month or two, or kind of just having a dip in numbers, I would say, not necessarily losing business. And for us, that threshold we initially thought was going to be a month. It ended up taking about, I think, 2.5 months to fully recoup all of our rankings, to recoup the average traffic that we were getting, and also the average signups we were driving. Um, but I think in the end, it worked out better because we had a stronger brand name. We got rid of a lot of, I would say, not like unqualified signups. So the quality of the people that we were bringing in was a lot higher because they were searching for us, not for another product, not for Soapbox as well as a term has
Hmm.
high volume because, it's like standing on a soapbox. It's like very political. There's just like all these different connotations that could come with it. And so we were ranked number one for that. That's gone, because obviously our brand, that name isn't in our domain anymore.
Hmm.
Um, and so I was okay with that. Initially, it hurt because I just didn't like seeing numbers go down. Um, but it just gave us a bit more focus on what actually matters,
Yeah.
and what quality of traffic and signups and people that were actually driving to the website, to the product. And so, yeah, I think the domain authority was a really, really good first indicator that we didn't fuck anything up, which was the very scary piece of like, this is a big change. How are we going to do this without like being completely catastrophic to our business? And so, yeah, it took us about 2 to 3 months to fully recoup, at least on the traffic front from organic. Referral traffic was the same because obviously none of the links changed. Everything got redirected, and social media and all of that kind of stuff. But
Hmm.
it's just you also have to rebuild brand recognition for this new name.
Yeah.
And it's not like soapbox something, it's like a completely drastic change,
Hmm.
like hyper context. It's very different. And so, yeah, it took us a while. We spent some time reaching out for us, like a big priority was making sure all the lists that mentioned us changed because that was also a big driver from a referral standpoint for quality signups. So we wanted to make sure that the experience for the customers, if they saw us on the list and were like, this is a great product, and then they land on our website and they're like, what the hell is hypercontext? I'm trying to find soapbox.
Yeah.
Like, did this blog write the wrong thing or link to the wrong thing? And so for a while we did have like previously soapbox, but I think after a month we just dropped it and said, let's just commit. It's been long enough. But I think something I learned was like, as much as there's so many things you can care about in a rebrand, like so many, the list is never ending. And you think that people care, you at least you feel that people will care about your brand as much as you do. And in reality, they don't. Like they're going to cheer you on. They're going to be like, cool. But how does it impact me as a customer? How does it impact, like, otherwise, if it has a negative impact on their experience with the product, yeah, that's a bad thing. So obviously figure that out. But if it has no impact, they're like, cool, you changed your name. That's great. Doesn't really change anything. And so I think having a bit of that pressure get taken off was quite nice, because I had to take a step back and like my CEO was like, you care about this way more than the average person. This is part of your identity. This is like, which is true. Like I think having gone through like being a team to being by myself to now like growing a team as well, like soapbox was a big piece of my growth as a marketer. And so that was a really big part of my identity. And I remember when we were all picking names, everything sucked because nothing was soapbox. And when we picked our name, I remember messaging my CEO. I was like, I hate this name. I hate it. And here's all the reasons why. And we
Yeah.
just talked for so long about it. And he made a point too, which I completely agree with. He's like, you're going to hate any name we pick because it's not soapbox. I was like, yeah, you're right. He's like, it'll grow. And it did to an extent, I would say. And I think it grew for the people who joined us after the rebrand as well. They're like, yeah, this is the brand. But I don't know. I would say, yeah, I would say if there's a really strong business case to rebrand, do it. If there's not, then it's not worth the stress. It's not worth the hassle. Like, I
Yeah.
think brand refreshes in terms of design, that's always nice. It is a lot of work, but to fully change a domain, I think you've got to have a really solid case, which it worked out in the end for us. Like I said, like after the 2-3 months, we were able to refocus. We beat all-time highs that we had at Soapbox in terms of like traffic and signups, but also just the quality of people we were getting again. It was a nice way to cut out a big chunk of people who wouldn't have otherwise wanted to use the product, want to use the product. And so, and also getting into YC was a really big factor as well for us. And so from a business perspective for us, it really, really made sense. It was a very logical, strategic move.
Hmm.
It was short-term pain, I would say, for a long-term gain.
Yeah.
But the short-term pain was rough, considering it was while we were going through YC and trying to show this explosive growth. Meanwhile, our like marketing numbers are just going down, down, down.
Wow.
And so that was a stressful time.
Yeah, I can imagine. Wow,
But
there's a lot of lessons I feel, just the whole prioritizing, really focusing on what matters, and
yeah,
realizing sometimes the hard brutal truth that not everybody cares as much about our baby as we do, and sometimes that baby, is not as pretty as we think it is, or whatever. I think there's a lot of
yeah.
lessons that you shared, but I want to get to these three final questions before we could do this for an hour because it's a really fun conversation. And also you're the first one to drop the F bomb, so I just want to congratulate you.
Oh,
No, I love it. I love it. I love the energy. It's great. All right. The first question of the three final questions. What is one thing you've changed your mind on in regards to marketing in the past 1, 2, 3, 4 years? You believed X, now you believe Y. I thought put as much content out in the world as you can. I now believe quality is better. What is
mhm.
that for you?
I think prior to coming to a company without a sales team, I was so gung ho about putting a form on everything. I was like, we need a form for this, we need a form for that. That's how we're going to get leads. This is how sales is going to have conversations. And I think part of that was just being in very, very sales led organizations, and also enterprise companies. It was just like forms is what makes sense. I did not put one form on the Soapbox website except for the newsletter sign up. That was the only form we had. And it was just such a drastic change. I realized that like you shouldn't like there's no purpose to gating content. It does not help the customer, the end user, the audience. It doesn't help those people. If you give them value, you can find ways to continue to have a strong brand as a result. And it didn't impact our business in a negative way, I would say. Yeah, it made personalization a little harder, but so did our tech stack. So that wasn't a big ability we could do, uh, anyways. But customers appreciated it so much more. The libraries we built grew. If we gated those things, it would not have grown. It would not have driven as much business impact. And so I think I'm going to, in the future, probably find a better balance between those two extremes. Um, but I think like ungating as much content as you possibly can. If there is a really good reason to gate content, go for it. But I feel like in most cases, there's not a good reason beyond selfish reasons, I would say. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that was my extreme, was like being so gung ho on forms and then just so anti form. So it was a fun
Yeah,
change.
yeah, it's kind of like a rubber band, right? You snap it, you go way back, but you eventually kind of come back to that middle ground. So I like that. That's what a kind of image popped in my head. All right, second question. That was a good answer. Second question. There's a movie called Inception. You might have watched it, you might not, but I always kind of give a quick brief synopsis. So it pretty much is just people, they go in the dreams of other people and they incept ideas. So and they wake up the next day and they're like, I'm going to sell my company. Like, that's a great idea. It's my idea. So if you could incept one idea in the mind of every marketer on the planet, so they wake up tomorrow and your idea you incepted is their idea, and their actions, their beliefs, everything drives because of that idea. What idea are you incepting?
I think taking out the idea that customer success or sales are the gatekeepers to talking to customers. I think that was the biggest change for me in terms of being able to think more strategically, to produce a better marketing strategy, to produce better content, like all of that. I think it's really easy for marketers to always just say, I can't talk to customers. Sales hasn't introduced me. Go talk to them yourself. Like, why do you need someone to introduce you? It doesn't have to be an existing customer. Talk to your ICP who's not using
Mm.
you. There's billions of people in the world. You can talk to one. And I think it's gonna impact so much of what you do and how you think for your business, for your strategy, for your work, and for your career, because now the work you're doing is actually going to have a stronger impact,
Yeah.
and you can have these crazy numbers on your LinkedIn or on your resume, and you'll be a much more desirable candidate, and then you'll be in a very privileged position, I would say. And so I don't know, it's been so rewarding talking to customers, and I hope that more people do it more often. Obviously, there's a better way to go about it, but we can kind of save that for another conversation.
Yeah.
Not to just say like, go talk to your customers. That's not very
Hmm.
helpful. But I think just even breaking into that mindset, it's a starting point.
Yeah, I think the world would have much better marketing if we all did that for sure. It would be less about us, the product, the company, and more about those customers as we
Yeah.
learn about them and we can, literally write their diary for them because we're just so in step with their beliefs and their say, yeah, that's great. That's great. All right, final
Yeah.
question. This one's a little bit outside of the marketing business realm, but what is one thing you do
Okay.
outside of business and marketing that then when you come back to do business and marketing, you do it better? So for me, it's going for a long walk before lunch. When I come back, I can just create better. I can think better. What is that thing for you?
Mm. Yeah, I think. Hmm. So I think having a week off in between jobs, I'm realizing that I really need more hobbies. Because I'm like, just I kept itching back, and here I am doing a podcast on
Can't let it
marketing.
go. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so so I think like walks are always really helpful. Obviously, we walk our dog quite a bit. He's completely zonked
Yeah.
out. Um, but yeah, walks I think are really helpful. I have a tough time kind of separating myself, taking myself out of the computer sometimes, especially if I'm stuck, even though that's definitely the best option. Other things I like to do is just like brew a pot of coffee, like, um, and I think that just is a good way to separate myself. Take even like not a big walk, but just a mini walk around the house and put my focus somewhere else. But otherwise, I just bought a few jigsaw puzzles, so I think that'll be a nice new
Hey, there
break.
we go. I like that.
More
Yeah, right.
hobbies.
Yeah, you definitely get to see when you're in between jobs or even during COVID, people are home more. It's like, wow, I really don't do much. So yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's cool. I also enjoy. I've really never put in words, but coffee brewing. Yeah, I do like a pour over. There's just
Mhm.
something about
Yeah.
it, the process, getting water hot, putting the coffee in, all of it that just kind of takes you away from your work, and you can come back with maybe not new ideas, but just let those ideas kind of swim around a bit. So I like that a lot. Final section.
Yeah.
Sorry, is there anything else you want to add to that? I didn't want to cut you off. I feel like the host that's just
No, 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 you're
moving the
good.
train.
Sorry. I'm just
No, no,
ad-libbing.
no, that's fine. We need that. Like any good hip hop song, we need a lot of ad libs. So, the final part of this is for you to kind of share anything with the 3 to 4 listeners that are currently still with us at this point. Just where can they find you? Is there anything people, should follow? Should, like, if you have a newsletter, podcast, whatever, this is your point to take the stage.
Oh man, I think like I'm on LinkedIn, but I don't really use LinkedIn. But I think where you'll have the most luck, at least even just chatting and seeing a lot of good but silly updates, I would say, is on Twitter. That's kind of where my sphere is, and my handle is H5Amin, which is the first letter of my name, five, and then my last name. It was my university ID that I was given, and I've just
Sure.
always used it since, I guess.
That.
No, nothing behind the number five other than that. I think I was just the fifth H Amin that went to
Oh,
school
jeez.
there. Um,
Okay,
but
awesome. I'll
yeah,
include that link to
yeah.
the Twitter in the show notes, and also the LinkedIn, just so people can go and just be kind of bamboozled by your stats. I don't think that was the right word, but just like eyes wide open, cartoonist, because it is cool, and to take some of it away of like, how can I do a better job of getting more specific. But thank you so much for this conversation. This was
Mhm.
way too much fun. I feel like I need to, kind of pay you some money for this conversation. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
No. Well, no, thanks for having me on the show. And thanks for listening to the 4 or 5 people who are still here.
Yes, this is currently the longest podcast we've had so far. So, yes, thank you so much.
Just here to beat records. I'll add it to
Hell yeah. Hell
LinkedIn.
yeah. All right. This is the end of the podcast.